Spartacus was directed by Stanley Kubrick, and it stars Kirk Douglas, Tony Curtis, Lawrence Oliver, and Gene Simmons. No, not that Gene Simmons. That Gene Simmons. After Paths of Glory, Stanley Kubrick was finally given the opportunity to direct a big-budget epic, though for the only time in history, Stanley Kubrick was not given complete creative control on the film. Rather, the studio had more control over the film. As a result, Kubrick would later disown this film, but after this point, Stanley Kubrick would demand complete creative control for each of his films. I personally think that compared to Paths of Glory and even The Killing, this film is a bit of a step backwards, though I feel like that there is quite a bit of enjoyment that can be found here. Before I get into my comprehensive thoughts, I want to issue a spoiler warning. Now, I know that this film is over 60 years old, and it's a little pointless for me to issue a spoiler warning for a film that old, but I know that there are quite a few people who haven't seen this film before, so I kind of want to play it safe. So if you want to avoid any and all spoilers and you want to go into this film completely blind, I would highly recommend clicking off this video right now. During the first act of this film, it isn't very difficult to get behind Spartacus and to care about him and to get behind his cause. The fight between Spartacus and Draba doesn't pull any punches when it comes to the emotional gravity and brutality. I especially love the scene before the fight, where these two men just sit and stare at each other, knowing that one is going to have to kill the other man. Though it is pretty easy to tell that Draba has other plans, just based on his facial expressions. Yes, this film clocks in at over 3 hours, but the pacing here is actually quite tight, and that is kind of unusual for a Stanley Kubrick film. Usually his films are a bit of a slow burn, but that isn't really a problem for me because the visuals are just honestly hypnotizing to watch, and his films are always just so captivating. Pacing-wise, this film feels a lot more like a traditional Hollywood movie rather than a Kubrick film. This is probably because of studio interference. I feel like that if Kubrick was given complete creative control over this film would have been a lot more interesting. My biggest problem with this film is the characterization of Spartacus. He just isn't flawed enough. Apparently Stanley Kubrick wanted to make this character a bit of a flawed hero, which I feel like would have been a whole lot more interesting. Unfortunately, Kubrick's efforts were kind of put in vain here, because this film's screenwriter, Dalton Trumbo, and Kirk Douglas really strived to make this character be morally perfect. Usually in a Kubrick film, morality is pretty gray, but here the morality is pretty black and white, and it's crystal clear who the good guys and bad guys are. Chances are Kubrick would have made Spartacus a complete POS, which probably would have been too far in the other direction, though I feel like that this direction would have certainly been more interesting. I feel Kirk Douglas does a really good job in making this character feel likable and charismatic, and of course the audience feels sad to see this guy get crucified. But I feel like this would have been a much more interesting journey if Spartacus had some character flaws. This might be far-fetched, but I feel like if Spartacus had some character flaws, it would have made his eventual fate feel maybe a little bit more earned. I know I might be contradicting myself a little here, but I really like this film's ending. The performances are really solid, especially Tony Curtis and Kirk Douglas. These two act the absolute hell out of the scene where they are forced to fight each other to the death. Yes, the part where Spartacus kills Antoninus is a little melodramatic, though this doesn't really take away from the scene, since I feel that the overall emotional drama still feels believable here. The one aspect that Kubrick had complete control over was the cinematography, and you can tell. This film was shot on glorious 70mm, creating a very large scope. This film is successfully able to use this very large canvas wisely. The sets are grand and epic, and the wide shots during the battle scenes are simply breathtaking. Apparently, this film originally had Russell Meddy as cinematographer for this film, who mind you, had an Oscar in his resume, but this didn't matter to Kubrick, since he would kind of take over Medi's position because the two would butt heads over creative differences. I'm not sure what Medi's vision would have been since Kubrick kind of took over, but it would be quite an understatement to say that I was completely satisfied with the final product. Overall, Spartacus is far from being one of Kubrick's best films, though I feel that there is still a lot to like here, including the performances and especially the cinematography. By the way, I would absolutely kill to see this film projected in 70mm. Though I feel like that this film could have been a lot more, but I was still entertained by it overall. Overall, Spartacus gets a B+. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed my review of Spartacus. And if you did, make sure to give this video a like. And if you want more content like this, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell notification so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. And shout out to Yertle the Turtle and Bruce Campbell. Thanks for watching.